What's up, gamers? Welcome back to 180 MTG. My name is Ryan Overturf, and this week marks part 2, the final installment of my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Early Impressions Cube review. Last week I talked about the general themes and mechanics and the cards that really support those themes and mechanics, and this week I'll be doing my usual breakdown of individually appealing and or powerful cards for Cube that don't fall into the set's more general themes. I'm actually recording this the same day as part one, trying to get a little bit ahead of recording. Just having one in the chamber, I think it's kind of nice when I've been traveling to not have to record, have some off weeks, but to still have something coming out every week. So I'm going to try to be a little bit more disciplined and get ahead of my recording, make sure I have something coming out every week and that I never have to take a week off, or taking a week off personally won't result in a week off of the podcast, and I have some time to spend this week, and who knows, maybe I'll even get a set review out before the pre-release in the future. Don't hold your breath on that, but we'll see what we can do. Before we get into things today, I'm going to plug those same fundraising links that I plugged last week. Again, mutual aid, the need for rent assistance, food assistance, legal battles here in Minnesota does remain high, so anywhere you can chip in there is greatly appreciated. Also, the battle against SB 244 in Kansas is certainly still going to be ongoing, so contributing to the ACLU to fight this unconstitutional and cruel attack on transgender folk in Kansas, really important, as well as any material assistance you can provide to trans folks on the ground who are going to need assistance with transportation, food, just everything that happens when vulnerable populations are under attack by powerful people. Really tragic stuff, but we can stand up for each other, and it's just a really simple thing you can do. I know there's a lot of overwhelming bad in the world right now, but just taking the time to be aware, every little bit helps. If you're able to contribute monetarily as well, it's a simple and easy thing you can do to contribute to making this world a better place. So really appreciate any support you can give to any of those orgs. And now for our regularly scheduled dose of escapism. So this week is just my usual breakdown of appealing individual cards from a Magic release for Cube. This is going to be the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles main release, as well as the corresponding Commander deck. Not enough stuff for that to really get its own review, so I'm going to lump those all together, and I will do my best to make a point to acknowledge when a card is from the main set or a Commander deck. Just assume it's the main set unless I say Commander deck is kind of how I do that, and I will be going alphabetically in color order. So of course, starting with white cards. That means our first card is Agent Bishop, Man in Black. For 2 and a white, you get a 1/2 legendary human soldier that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. So this, of course, does play in the set's general +1/+1 counter theme, but Agent Bishop is really just a rate card. You can put this in any cube that has just an aggressive curve. Your white three mana slot, it's going to be pretty crowded. There's a lot of really strong white 3-drops, certainly for aggressive decks. And this is not the kind of thing you want to play in a controlling deck. I mean, you can, it blocks well enough, but mostly Agent Bishop is going to be a good follow-up, really similar to a card like Luminarch Aspirant, which is a 2-drop that just puts a +1/+1 counter on one thing every turn. So Agent Bishop, you pay an extra mana, but you get to put counters on 2 things. So the idea is definitely you want to have a 1 and or a 2-drop, just at least one other creature when you cast Agent Bishop. He's fine if he's your first creature on the battlefield, but you get a full 3/4's worth of power and toughness the first turn you play him if you have some other body to put up there, which is, why I'm saying you want this more for an aggressive deck than a controlling deck. Definitely the kind of card that can slot into your Magic Arena or Magic Online Vintage Cube, Powered Cube, just attack and block deck. It's got enough stats for that. I'm going to say that this is something that's going to ruffle some feathers. I know some people love Brimaz, but this is just another more splashable card that I think is generally stronger than Brimaz, King of Oreskos. But again, there's a lot of space here, a lot of crowding happening with white 3-drops. If you care about humans, it's a thing there. If you care about counters, it's going to make this more appealing. This is just a strong rate card that is eminently pretty replaceable. Agent Bishop, Man in Black, it's strong, but it's nothing that anybody really needs. And just like that, we're on to blue, which is not to say that there's no appealing white cards. Some of that is just the way that I break down these cube reviews. Last week I talked about the themes and mechanics, and white, a lot of the appealing white cards have the sneak mechanic, and there's some I didn't even talk about last week. I try to talk about cards that break the mold for me, cards that I specifically find appealing. Once you get into 4 and 5 mana stuff too, there's a 4 mana Leonardo, lets you cast 1 power or toughness creatures from your graveyard when you control it. I just think it's pretty replaceable when you get into 4 drops, and because of the loud aesthetic of TMNT, I think that people that wants to play that card won't have difficulty finding that card. So I try to put some shine on either the most significant cards in the set. Agent Bishop is pretty generic, but I do think that a 3-drop is more worth talking about than a 4-drop. But anyway, we're on to blue here. This is a card from the Commander decks. This is Irma, Part-Time Mutant. For 2 and a blue, you get a 1/1 legendary human mutant shapeshifter that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, Irma becomes a copy of up to 1 other target creature you control, except her name is Irma, Part-Time Mutant, and she has this ability. Then put a +1/+1 counter on here. So there's a couple things to unpack here. This is a really cool implementation of a clone. Notably, Irma is going to enter as Irma. Irma will not immediately clone something else, so you won't be able to copy enters triggers, which is a strike against my most clone-heavy cube. I actually did pick up a copy of Irma to put into the Spooky cube, but typically when I play Phantasmal Image or stuff like that in that cube, I'm trying to copy stuff like Thalia's Lieutenant, and you do clone Blood Artist effects, which is kind of the thing. Irma's going to be looking to clone either large bodies or static abilities. You won't be able to get enters effects, but it is notable that even if Irma is not copying anything, Irma does get a +1/+1 counter every turn. You copy up to 1 thing, and just resolving this ability means that Irma grows over time. For 3 mana, that's a pretty good return on rate just for a blue creature that attacks and blocks. And the ability to copy something, it has to be a creature you control, but presumably you're going to be drafting creatures that are worth playing. If they're worth playing, they're worth copying. You can copy legends because Irma does retain her name. I think that Irma Part-Time Mutant is a pretty appealing and fun card. Definitely if you're trying to play a cube that's about generating wide battlefields, attacking and blocking, both copying any kind of meaningful static ability and growing over time, both make Irma Part-Time Mutant a pretty appealing creature in blue. And just as quickly as we moved on to blue, we are on to black. The first black card I want to talk about also comes from the Commander deck. This is Game Over for 3 black. It's a sorcery. This spell costs 2 less to cast. If a player's life total is less than or equal to half their starting life total, destroy all creatures. So 5 is kind of steep for a board wipe, a destroy all creatures kind of effect, but 3 is pretty cheap. Toxic Deluge remains a card that is quite playable, even all the way up to powered cubes, certainly at the 540 card size. You have to pay life for Toxic Deluge. That is a drawback on the card, but it's still quite playable despite that. For Game Over, you have to take a lot of damage first. You can run into trouble if your opponent, well, one, any sweeper is going to be weak if your opponent's not trying to win with creatures, but set that aside. If your opponent has planeswalkers, that becomes a problem for any kind of creature board wipe, but that doesn't hold Toxic Deluge back. It's still a very playable card. And it is going to be the case against the power level of the strongest creatures ever printed when you're playing these higher powered cubes. You're just going to lose some life. Even if you're able to navigate the early game pretty effectively, you're going to take some damage. It's going to be interesting when you're playing Game Over. You can finesse this a little bit. You can use your fetch lands and shock lands and things like that to make sure you get to the less than half your life total at the right clip so that you can execute on the mana discount here. And if you are navigating a game where you're playing against a creature deck and you're able to preserve your life, in that texture of game, it's generally going to be fine to pay 5 mana for a sweeper. There's gameplay back and forth. Your opponent, they're going to be aware that Game Over is a thing. If it's a card in the cube, they might change how they pressure your life total based on the card's existence. So I'm not saying that this one is a home run. It's not open and shut, just go in every cube, and full disclosure, game over is not going into any of my cubes. But if you're playing a 540 card cube where there's a lot of creatures happening, where a sweeper is appealing, if you're playing with a card like Toxic Deluge, it makes sense to me at least to try game over. I don't think that it's going to be an immediate staple or a long-standing staple, anything like that, but the potential for a 3-mana sweeper is absolutely something that I would be interested in if I was playing a larger cube and interacting with creatures was a part of the gameplay at all, which tends to be a lot of cubes. That's just kind of the backbone of Magic, so Game Over does seem like a card to be aware of for cube designers. Next up is one from the main set. This is Super Shredder, 1 and a black for a 1/1 legendary mutant ninja human with menace. And whenever another permanent leaves the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Super Shredder. So immediately you see the applications for Super Shredder in something like a sacrifice deck where you grow as you sacrifice your creatures, just having some kind of outlet that grows for that over time. But that's a shape of card we've seen a number of times in the past where you have something that doesn't have the ability to sacrifice on its own. It can't sacrifice other creatures, only grows off of your other sacrifice things. Those cards historically have not been very powerful, but meaningfully, Super Shredder does a couple things different. One, it is an evasive creature on its own. That matters. It has menace. But more importantly, it's just any permanent leaving the battlefield. So your fetch lands, your Mishra's Baubles, whatever, they are going to grow Super Shredder. And then even more importantly, it cues off of your opponent's things. Now, generally, when it comes to sacrifice, I actually have a big distaste for some asymmetrical effects, kind of depending on what they do. I don't believe that I've ever put this out in any of my cube content, but I actually really hate the card Mayhem Devil as a cube card, but that's because it has a damage trigger that randomly cues off what your opponent is doing, and if you're supporting a sacrifice deck, when you play the mirror and one player has Mayhem Devil, the games are just awful. But Super Shredder, you can still play a sacrifice theme. It's just something you're going to have to think about. So when you put a Super Shredder in a cube with sacrifice, it is going to be really strong in the sacrifice mirror, but it's still a creature that is just pretty vulnerable to removal. When it shows up immediately, it is just a 1/1, though it will grow very quickly, but it doesn't disrupt your opponent. You can still play a sacrifice game. You have to be mindful of the fact that the Shredder can grow very large and kill you in a small number of hits, but it's not going to do things like kill all of your 1 toughness creatures just for trying to play the game. So I'm a huge fan of the design of Super Shredder. Any cube that has a sacrifice theme in black, I think Super Shredder is going to have a home there. This is very much going into Spooky Cube. Being a human matters there. And I think just generally, if you have a black creature deck, just an aggressive black deck, Super Shredder cues off of enough things that it's worth looking at for a really wide range of cubes. Super Shredder absolutely one of the standouts for cube in the TMNT set. Next up is another one from the Commander deck. This is Swift Demise, an instant for 2 and a black. Swift Demise deals 1 damage to target creature, then destroy each creature you don't control that was dealt damage this turn. So the floor here is this is a more splashable murder, 1 black black, destroy target creature. You don't have the ability to destroy a planeswalker or some other card type that you often see on black removal spells now. So murder, not really a very appealing card by 2026 standards, but there is some upside here. Definitely if you are in a black creature based deck, Swift Demise, it is interesting in the way it can open up to make some attacks where your opponent can block your small creatures and you're able to get a bunch of creatures with the Swift Demise. If you're playing with creatures with First Strike, you can get some extra value with Swift Demise that way. I think in general, it's actually kind of hard to really leverage Swift Demise to get more than a 1-for-1 exchange, which I think is honestly part of the fun with the card. If you put it in a cube where murder is just kind of below rate and not very appealing, I don't think Swift Demise is really going to be that playable in that kind of environment. But if murder is like kind of playable, if you would play it sometimes, and there are some ways to take advantage of Swift Demise, if you have like a pinger, like I said, first strike creatures, a Gravecrawler, honestly, is not that bad with Swift Demise. The texture of the card existing can make it a lot harder to block creatures like Bloodghast and Gravecrawler. It's a card that I think will often just destroy one creature for 3 mana, which again is not that appealing in a lot of cubes, but you know your cube, you will know how appealing that effect is, and there are ways that you can build synergies with Swift Demise to the point where I think it is definitely worth pointing out as a cube consideration. And now we're on to red. First up in red is Casey Jones Vigilante from the main set. Casey Jones Vigilante is a 3 mana 4/3 for 1 red red, a legendary human berserker. When Casey Jones enters, draw 3 cards. At the beginning of your next upkeep, discard 3 cards at random. So you get a full turn duration here, very similar to the card Ideas Unbound from Sabers of Kamigawa, except that was a sorcery that drew 3 cards and you discarded 3 cards at your end step. Casey Jones is different because you get into your next upkeep. So minimally, you'll be able to untap on the following turn and potentially cast some instance in response to this trigger. Notably, the discard is random, but you get a 3 mana 4/3. Balduvian Horde is kind of a classic bad card that people were excited about from Alliances. It's a 4 mana 5/5 where you discard a card at random when it enters. Casey Jones is above rate, 3 mana 4/3, not above rate in a way that really matters. It still dies to a lot of the removal spells you'd expect any 3 mana creature to die for, and it is just card parity. You draw 3, then discard 3 at random. But that discard trigger, if you are playing in a discard theme, you can get some mileage out of that. I'm actually not putting Casey Jones Vigilante into Spooky Cube because actually discarding immediately is kind of an important part of the texture of that cube. You don't want to cast Casey Jones on turn 3 and wait until the following turn to grow your Marauding Mako. You really want to kind of be going just constantly every turn drawing and discarding. So tapping low for a delayed discard trigger is not that appealing in that cube environment. Also, discarding at random. I have expressed my distaste for that and the flaws of the original Odyssey block and discarding at random. But Casey Jones is a pretty reasonable just value card. I think absolutely if you're into Berserkers. I've heard of people doing cubes that are like themed off of Mad Max and just kind of like that post-apocalyptic wasteland kind of world, and both discarding at random and just like this psychopath in a hockey mask, Casey Jones Vigilante, seems like it would fit the aesthetic for something like that. So I do think that this is a cube card that has some appeal, certainly for some environments that I have seen. And while I'm personally more invested in humans mattering as a creature type, I am sure that there are people that cube with Berserkers as well. And whatever you're doing aesthetically with Berserkers, drawing and discarding at random seems like it has to fall in line with what you're doing there. So, very cool card in Casey Jones Vigilante. Next up is a class. This is Cool But Rude, immediately one of my favorite card names of all time. This card is cool but rude. It's 1 and a red for an enchantment class on level 1. Whenever you attack, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. Level 2, you get 2 for another 1 and a red, and whenever you discard a card, this class deals 2 damage to each opponent, and you get to level 3 for 1 more and 1 more red. When this class becomes level 3, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, shuffle, then discard a card at random. So level 1, you get this rummage ability every time that you attack. That's not bad, not always worth a card. You need to explore some discard synergies to make that work. But then if you have these discard synergies going, every time you discard a card at level 2 for whatever reason, you deal 2 damage to your opponent. That adds up quick. You can really end a game quickly doing that much damage off of any discard. Being an enchantment means that Cool But Rude is difficult to interact with as well, and that's enough damage where you could just kind of put this card into a cube that doesn't have a discard theme. I won't be doing that, but I will be putting this into Spooky Cube. And I don't know how much level 3 actually matters, but importantly, it gives you a discard, and Gamble is a card that's not like a non-starter in Cube. It's not a card that I have in any of my designs, but it's a card that I think about a lot. It's a card that has some constructed pedigree alongside with Life from the Loam and Legacy. And absolutely, if you're already playing this card otherwise, whether you're exploring a discard theme and this is one of your discard outlets, or you just see this as enough damage for a card and some card selection to put into your aggressive deck, which I think is a totally reasonable thing to do, you're going to get some fun drama going to level 3, tutoring for something. You always get a discard, you always get to deal 2 damage to your opponent, but the drama of resolving a gamble, and sometimes you get to keep what you tutor for, sometimes you don't. The fact that you might have to discard the card also might mean that you tutor for not the best option. Sometimes you get a card that you would like to draw, but not the best possible, in case you discard it and you want to still have the best possible top deck in your deck. So that's a really fun texture of a card, and just having that stapled on to a card that is otherwise playable is a really great recipe for a consistently fun cube card. So Cool But Rude is a card that I am very excited to cube with. Next up is a weirdo from the Commander decks in Electric Seaweed. This is a reference to an old TMNT video game. There's actually a lot of video game references, some in the main set and a lot in the Commander deck here, which gives some good nostalgia for some older gamers like me. Electric Seaweed is 2 red for a 0/4 plant wall with Defender and Haste. We love a wall with haste. Whenever this creature enters until end of turn, whenever another creature dies, this creature deals 1 damage to each non-wall creature, and tap, this creature deals 1 damage to any target. So I love you can damage any target. So you have your 4 mana wall, you can do some blocking, can damage your opponent, so it's not just blank if there's no creatures on the battlefield. Granted, 4 mana is a lot of mana. This is not a card that I think is going to show up in a lot of cubes, but the effect is just so unique, where you have this Enter's ability that can be a full sweeper, and importantly, won't destroy the Electric Seaweed itself, so it gets to stick around, and you still have this pinger going forward. This is just a really bizarre card, and the more you explore a cube space where you're highlighting a lot of the oddities and the history of Magic, Electric Seaweed is just so unique and weird and cool that I know that there's going to be a segment of the player base that's very excited about this card. It doesn't fit into any of my designs. I know for sure, the kind of cube that this stands out for me, I would absolutely put this into a Commander cube, no questions asked, because when you're playing multiplayer, when you're playing Commander, you just want players to play with weird cards, and the emphasis is less on them being powerful and more on them telling cool stories. Electric Seaweed both having a pretty unique text box that can lead to some unique and fun games, build some stories that way, and also just that history with the video game reference there is a story to that people can bond over. So I personally don't plan to cube with Electric Seaweed, but I do see the appeal here, and I'm excited to hear about the way that people implement this one in cube. I think it's a very cool design. And now we are on to green. Our first card is another from the Commander deck. This is one of the face commanders, one of the turtles with character select. Not going to talk about that, but this is Michelangelo the Heart. 1 and a green for a 2/1, a legendary mutant ninja turtle with trample, and raid, in parentheses, the fridge. At the beginning of your second main phase, if you attacked this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and create a food token. So it is just raid. This card cares if you attacked this turn. You have to control Michelangelo pre-combat, but then if you attacked with any creature, you can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and you create a food token. So Michelangelo himself is a 2/1 with trample. So it's going to grow over time if you're attacking with anything. If it's just an open board, Michelangelo can do the whole thing himself, can, grow himself, make the attacks himself, but it plays really well with any other creatures on the battlefield. Michelangelo is a source of food tokens turn over turn. If you care about generating food and food synergies, and your cube also involves getting engaged with combat, this just seems like a really easy card to slot into a cube like that. You also make +1/+1 counters, so if you have any kind of hardness scales, any kind of counter synergies, there's a lot of stuff that Michelangelo easily synergizes with. And for a 2 mana 2/1 trample, this is one of those cards where I talk a lot about how green is so good at mana ramp and is largely bad at a lot of other things. But a 1 green pip 2-drop that generally incentivizes attacking and gives you value for attacking. This is the kind of card that's very meaningful to move the needle, to green being better able to engage as a color that's just engaging with combat and being good at engaging with combat instead of really needing to be the Llanowar Elves, the Birds of Paradise color. So I really like what Michelangelo the Heart does bring to the world of Cube. I have two objections to Michelangelo the Heart. They don't have anything to do with the actual design, the game mechanics of the card. I guess character select is an additive distraction thing. I'm generally going to be playing 2-player games with 20 life. I don't have any commanders, but it's the bottom part of the text. It's pretty easy to just treat that like flavor text. But when it comes to this card, I have two objections that actually have to do with the distribution model with commander decks. There's two things happening here. The first, these face commanders, when you buy the commander deck, the copy you get in the commander deck is just foil. We know how foils curl. I like just having non-foil cards. All of the cards in my cubes overwhelmingly are non-foils. There's a very small number of exceptions, and they tend to have to do with these distribution models. So you can only get a non-foil Michelangelo the Heart in collector boosters, which having to go to the premium product to get the no frills version is kind of irritating to me. Like foils just being shiny and cheap versus them being premium and then just having the regular card being premium. It just feels gross to me. And I guess that's like me being kind of self-important because I want the non-foil. So yeah, the thing I want being more expensive aggravates me. Wah, 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 cry me a river. But then aesthetically, it does irritate me that Michelangelo the Heart only exists in a borderless version. I like cards with regular card frames. Like, I generally go for non-foil inset printing. So Michelangelo, you have to go out of your way to get a non-foil in collector boosters. No matter what you do, it's a borderless card. So it sticks out like a sore thumb in my cubes where generally I have non-foil regular set printings, cards with a regular card frame, cards with borders around the card. So I have my own petty gripes with Michelangelo the Heart, but just in terms of the text box, what the card does, very cool cube card, very nice design. And now we're on to gold cards. TMNT uses a heavier sampling of hybrid than we've seen in a lot of sets in the past. A lot of this has to do with it being a small set, encouraging a lot of 4-player drafts. Hybrid mana really effective there. I, of course, love hybrid mana as somebody who really plays in the 2 and 4-player cube space. Anyway, the first gold card I want to talk about is Bebop and Rocksteady. This is a 7/5 for 1 and 2 black-green hybrid mana. It's a legendary Boar Rhino mutant that says whenever Bebop and Rocksteady attack or block, sacrifice a permanent unless you discard a card. So this is just a giant creature. You can put this in your green deck, in your black deck, in your Golgari deck, whatever. It's pretty easy to cast with some hybrid mana there. And then you have a restriction on attacking or blocking, sacrificing a permanent, or discarding a card. You can play this with sacrifice. You can play this with discard matters as a discard outlet. Like, this can be something that feeds into synergies. But just as a baseline, a 7/5 is gigantic. There's no evasion here. It's kind of easy to picture Bebop and Rocksteady being played and somebody being very excited about it. And then in terms of actual game impact, it's just chump blockable. It's just pretty easy to tag with a removal spell. 7/5 is big, but it still dies to a lot of the heavily played cards you'd expect to see in a cube, even at lower powers. It's going to run into murder and just trade even on mana. So it's a really cool card. I think it's exciting to see a 3 mana 7/5. But then in terms of gameplay, I think it's actually important that you seed Bebop and Rocksteady into a deck that is exploiting some synergies, because a 3 mana 7/5 is deceptive in how powerful and effective it actually is in regular games of Magic. But it's kind of like a Rotting Regisaur kind of thing, where I'm happy to put this in a Reanimator deck, and if it comes to it, if my opponent is just like packing Graveyard Hate, something I don't really put in my cube. So if you're playing a cube where that's what you're about, if that's what's going on, then having a creature that can attack and close games easily is something that is appealing to have as an alternate win condition, and something degenerate like a Reanimator deck that has weird interaction points. And Bebop and Rocksteady also pretty cool as a sacrifice outlet or a discard outlet. It's just a big beefer. I don't know. It's a cool card. I like Bebop and Rocksteady a lot, even though I personally will not be putting it into any of my cubes. Next up is Northwind Avatar. It's a 5/5 Dragon Spirit Avatar for 2 blue, blue, red. It has flying, and when this creature enters, if you cast it, you may put a card you own from outside the game into your hand. So kind of a wish, as it were, that original cycle from Odyssey block that could put cards from outside the game into your hand. This, of course, means you grab a card from your sideboard. Notably for Cube, you could have access to any basic land, assuming you're not curating a desert cube. If you have access to a land box, you can absolutely just put basic lands in your sideboard, so Northwind Avatar could grab those. That's the floor. You can use this and make sure you're hitting your next land drop on your 5 mana 5/5 Flying Dragon. We can absolutely dream bigger than that, though. There's been issues with this kind of card in Cube in the past. Largely, the question is, especially if you're playing a singleton environment, if the card is so good, why is it not in my main deck in the first place? And that matters when you talk about a card like Cunning Wish, where in Constructed, you of course can have a wish board. You'll have some interaction, maybe you have a win condition that you cleverly have tucked away in your sideboard. That stuff can be really powerful if you have access to a large card pool and you can just build a deck. In Cube, especially if you're talking about a card that immediately has no impact on the battlefield, you just kind of spend 2, 3, 4 mana, whatever the effect costs, and you grab a card that is generally expected to be weaker than the cards in your deck. Northwind Avatar addresses a lot of that problem by just being a 5 mana 5/5 flyer. This card is just appealing, it is strong. It is the kind of thing where, like, there's not immediate synergies or use cases that come to mind where I'm super excited to put Northwind Avatar into a cube. I guess the biggest thing is if I have, like, creature, like dragon, spirit, or avatar synergies. It's a really cool one to make sure I fit in if I'm exploring any of those creature types mattering. Dragon, of course, being the standout, a really cool creature type to support. Any of that behold stuff can play really well. And then you have access to this card that's going to grab, the 24th card, the card that didn't quite make your main deck, maybe a situational sweeper that's very good in the game. Grabbing a card from your sideboard is not the most powerful effect, not by a long shot. In a lot of situations, it won't be quite as good as draw a card, but in a high-powered cube, and also some people, they do draft in a way where they draft more total cards to end up with a bigger sideboard. This one can be pretty high impact. I thought about adding Northwind Avatar to the original recipe Tubert. It doesn't quite fit my designs or sensibilities. Also, with only 3 gold slots for a 2-color pair, there's not a ton of room, and there's a lot of pressure on the mana curve there. But Northwind Avatar is the kind of card that I think is just kind of fun to toss into your cube. Definitely if you're at like 540 cards. This is going to be more whimsical and fun probably than a lot of the cards that you are considering anyway. And Northwind Avatar is one that will at least always put a smile on my face to see in a cube pack. Next up is Toka and Razar, terrible twos. They're terrible twos because They're babies. Toka and Razar Terrible Twos is a 3/2 for 2 black and red hybrid mana, a legendary turtle wolf mutant. This can't be countered, has menace, and whenever a player casts a spell, if the amount of mana spent to cast it was less than its mana value, Toka and Razar deal 3 damage to that player. So this is just a solid card on rate. You can't counter it. That's not super important for your 2-drop, but as Menace, that is nice. The little blocking restriction there, a little evasion. And there's quite a lot of ways that a player can cast a spell for less than its mana cost. Talking about pitch spells, recently Edge of Eternity's Warp. Warp's a big one. Your opponent warps their Quantum Riddler. That's a way that Toka and Razar can deal some damage to them there. There's just a lot that this triggers off of, and this is hybrid, so it can go in a red or a black deck or a Rakdos deck very easily. A little harder to fit into a 3-color deck, but absolutely if you have a black aggressive deck and a red aggressive deck, Toka and Razar is going to be just very castable and just a really nice card on curve that, do a little inventory there. There's free stuff or discounted stuff in a lot of Magic's mechanics historically in this set. A lot of sneak cards are going to be cheaper to sneak in than they are to cast. That's not universally true, but it's just one of the many ways that you will be able to trigger this creature, which is just very reasonable to cast as a 2-mana threat in the first place. So Toka and Razar, Terrible Twos. Nice card on rate, not going to any of my cubes, but is very much just like a legacy cube, reasonable power level, assuming that you have a black aggressive deck. I think if it's only going into mono red, that's a pretty big strike against it. But as long as you have the black aggressive stuff going on, and you do care about just being beat down through supporting players' ability to do that, then this one can slot into your cube pretty easily. And moving right along to colorless, first we have Krang, Utrom Warlord, a 9-mana 9/9 legendary artifact creature Utrom robot with flying, trample, indestructible, and haste that also says other artifact creatures you control have flying, trample, indestructible, and haste. Now you might be thinking, that sounds like an artifact matters card. It grants abilities to other stuff. That's not what's happening here. That's the reason I did not put this into my artifacts matter section last week, because this is just a big boom boom to cheat and to play. That's what it is. This is a creature to reanimate, to sneak attack, to tinker out. I've seen a lot of conversation online, people saying that Krang is arguably better to tinker out than Blightsteel Colossus. I can definitely see it in some games. The comparison I actually want to make, and the reason I want to make it is because there's a card that's just been in a lot of the digital powered cube that sucks, called Triplicate Titan, that is very easy to cut from those cubes. I would absolutely turn any Triplicate Titan in my powered cube into Krang Utrom Warlord. Having a haster here that can often close the game in 2 hits is a pretty big deal, and Triplicate Titan is always the worst card in every deck that plays it. So I do like Krang quite a lot for powered cubes. I make no apologies for Triplicate Titan fans. We all like some garbage. It's fine. But Krang is one that I do intend to experiment with in powered cubes. It's one that I would not at all be surprised to see show up in the Magic Online and Magic Arena vintage cubes. I think at 540, it's very easy to slot in at a Tinker target. And even as I continue to try to crack the code of a 180 card vintage cube, Krang does stand out as a card that will likely be on my shortlist for inclusion in just such a powered cube. And that brings us to Skateboard, a 1-mana equipment. When this equipment enters, tap target permanent. Equipped creature get +1/+0 and has haste and equip for 1. So this card is very texturally similar to Lava Spur Boots. The difference between these cards, Lava Spur Boots is going to give the creature Ward 1, whereas Skateboard is going to tap a permanent as it enters. Otherwise, exact same card types, casting cost, activation cost. So there's definitely some give and take there. There's going to be environments that are more about attrition, where you are going to value things like Ward 1. I have had Lava Spur Boots in the Tempo Tubert. That's an environment where tapping a thing is generally going to be less appealing than that Ward 1 actually tapping your opponent's mana when a lot of the games are about casting cheap removal spells on creatures. That's something that is going to be more significant, absolutely, if a lot of the games are about casting two burn spells like Lava Dart, Flashback. Lava Dart is pretty weak against an active Lava Spur Boots, so that's a part of the card's appeal for something like that environment. Where you see Lava Spur Boots as like an Urza Saga target, and certainly if it's going to be in an actual powered cube, or you're going to have stuff like Nadu, Winged Wisdom, it's not nothing that Skateboard enters, and that enters trigger can immediately trigger your Nadu. In the circumstance where your opponent has a removal spell in response, it's a way where I guess equipping, you get a trigger off of the Nadu, you'll have a window to equip for one either way, but the enters trigger at least is 0 mana as opposed to 1 mana. So there's some give and take there. Like, it's not clear what is stronger, tapping a permanent versus giving Ward 1. I think if Skateboard had Flash, it would kind of be no questions. But 1 mana tap permanent, that obviously they weren't going to print that. But tapping something at sorcery speed, there's something to consider here, one versus the other, and I think it's absolutely reasonable to just have both. It is the case that I would rarely want both cards in the same deck, so you would want to make sure that it is appealing to play this kind of 1 mana haste equipment in multiple archetypes in your cube. If you want to have both Skateboard and Lava Spur Boots in the same environment, that's the kind of redundancy that can just kind of make it less interesting, where one player drafts both very easily and doesn't care about playing both. It's just kind of like less interesting decisions in the draft and not that interesting decisions in deck construction. But it is worth thinking about which one might be more appealing in your environment. And it is also true that in the Tempo Tubert, tapping a blocker is something to think about relative to that Ward 1. So both cards are appealing and interesting in different ways, and for different cubes. I've picked up a couple copies of Skateboard. I could go one way or the other in different environments, but it is one that I would absolutely think about if you are in the market for Lava Spur Boots already. And one last artifact I want to go over is Weathermaker, a 3-mana artifact with landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, you put a charge counter on Weathermaker. It has tap to add 1 mana of any color. You could also tap it and remove 2 charge counters from the artifact to add 2 colorless mana, or you can tap it and remove 3 charge counters from Weathermaker to do 3 damage to any target. If this is kind of similar to what I was saying about, you would have to be interested in murder to be interested in Swift Justice. If you're not already interested in playing a Manalith, if that card is so inefficient to be a non-starter, you probably aren't going to want Weathermaker in your cube. But if Manalith is an effect where, yeah, it would shape up your curve, it would play reasonably, but then if you have like fetch lands, or even if you're playing games that take a number of turns, which means you make a number of land drops, where sometimes if your Manalith could make 2 mana, it would be excellent, or if mana is not a concern, being able to deal 3 damage to something could be meaningful in swinging a game. Either it's a form of reach, it's taking care of a creature your opponent controls, it's finishing off of a planeswalker. I think Weathermaker does a lot of cool things. I think it's very much the case that if you would just never play a Manalith in your cube, you probably aren't that interested in Weathermaker. Sometimes Weathermaker is just going to be a Manalith. That's all it's going to do is tap for 1 mana, or, to the extent that it could remove, make 2 mana or deal 3 damage. It just, won't always be a factor in the game, is what I'm getting at. So if you wouldn't ever play Manalith, I understand Manalith is not in a lot of cubes, that doesn't mean you wouldn't play it sometimes. Just take a look at decks in your cube. If you think, yeah, I wouldn't be embarrassed to have Manalith here, and there's some potential utility, absolutely, if you have fetch lands, so your Weathermaker could function as a Worn Power Stone, tapping for 2 mana is a pretty big deal, even on a 3 mana card. And dealing that 3 damage to any target, that can absolutely be a factor in games in most cube environments. So Weathermaker is one that I'm not slotting into any of my cubes, but I just think this design is really cool, and it's one that I would love to see in some cubes somewhere. And then lastly, there is one land from TMNT that I think is worth mentioning, and that is Northampton Farm, a land that taps for a colorless mana. It also has two other abilities. You can pay one and tap it to exile a creature you control, and you can pay two and tap it to sacrifice this land to return a creature card exiled with this land to the battlefield under your control, and you also return each other card exiled with this land to its other's hand. If you have an appetite for a land that taps for colorless, if you have space for it, this is absolutely the kind of card that can just fight a war of attrition against a controlling deck. They play a removal spell, or you overcommit maybe a little bit into a sweeper and you exile one of your creatures in response. You can just kind of fight that way. And the fact that you don't only get one creature back, like you put a creature back onto the battlefield with that 2 mana and sack the land ability, and all the other ones also go to your hand. So you could really grind through a controlling deck with this card. I don't have intentions to cube with Northampton Farm. Where I was looking at it is this is a card where I thought this would absolutely play in 30 to 50 feral hogs, like in the removal spell versus razor swine kind of game. This kind of effect would be very good to have access to, but I have deemed that it is be way too powerful for that environment. This repeated kind of effect where the only thing that the games are about are razor swine, like you kind of get card advantage if you can pull it off multiple times, and I'm really hesitant to put easy access card advantage into that cube and getting the multiple activations. It might be worth trying out if I have another card that I'm thinking about cutting. I could see trying it, but I do just think that this is too easy to leverage in that environment. Too many of the games are clearly about that kind of thing, and then you get big card advantage as a payoff there. But if you have something texturally similar where there's a lot of games of attrition and maybe the aggressive decks could just use a little bit more of a tool to grind and the mana is good enough that you have space for a colorless land, Northampton Farm is a card that I think you would happily play in a lot of aggressive decks. And certainly, if you're playing in like a Blink theme, if you have a lot of enters abilities, sometimes you would even just proactively use the Northampton Farm. Like the battlefield gets bogged down, you have a bunch of creatures staring at each other on both sides. Just start exiling your creatures with enters abilities and then pop the farm to put one on the battlefield, immediately trigger that, and also put the rest back into your hand. This is just a really good card for grinding over the course of a long game, and Northampton Farm absolutely would play in a lot of cubes. And that's going to be it for my breakdown of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and the cards that I see as most appealing for the world of Cube. Of course, I'm not going to talk about every card in any set. I might not have talked about some of your favorites. If you got one that you think that I really missed, by all means, let me know what you're playing with, what you're excited about. I'm just trying to focus on the things where I talk about them in a capacity where I retain my sanity and I focus on trying to get a highlight reel instead of just exhaustively turning over every leaf. The point of this is not to talk about every card, but just to get the conversation going. And I think that generally just kind of the highlight of the themes and the cubes and things to explore is what I consider is more important than individual cards. I think it's a lot easier for players to find individual cards than to necessarily be aware of sets that are really going to expand a theme that hasn't been explored before, and just talking about that, because building off of a theme tends to be the bedrock for a lot of my designs at the very least. And with so many set releases, I think I do think it's meaningful to talk about those, and then I try to talk about whatever cards I see as more appealing. So I hope you enjoy listening to that today, and this is going out the same week as Shoebox, so when you're listening to this, I'm probably getting ready for the weekend to participate in the Cube event at Shoebox at the St. Paul River Center, March 13th to the 15th. Come find me, come talk Cube, come get a sticker for the podcast, so your support that way. I appreciate you taking the time to listen this week, as always, as well as anything else you do to support the pod, liking, commenting, reviewing, subscribing, sharing. Word of mouth, a really big deal for creative endeavors like this. So tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell total strangers how you feel about 180 MTG, and I will be back next week talking more Cube. Later, gamers.